Today on the show, we're joined by Duncan MacPherson, CEO of Pareto Systems, which specializes in coaching for growth-minded financial advisors and visionary firms. Duncan is also a speaker, coach, and author, a fellow podcaster. He's here to talk with us about his unique perspective of the industry and share a few coaching tips for us. I'm Paul Blanco, and this is Small Steps, Big Wins. All right. Well, Duncan, welcome to Small Steps, Big Wins. I'm so happy to have you on, and I'm glad we finally were able to connect here and talk about a ton of stuff that's going on. And you have a lot of great stuff that you're doing in the space here with coaching and advisors. So welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Paul. Thanks for having me.
You got it. So I always like to start in the beginning. Like, what brought you into this industry and how did you get here?
Yeah, thanks. Completely accidental. I had a marketing company and a good chunk, probably 20% of our clients at the time were financial advisors. I didn't really know a lot about the business, but I had some friends that became financial advisors or clients that became friends who were already financial advisors. And I started to see that it was a pretty good space. And I said to a friend, I said, so what's the deal with this business? And he said, if you want to make any real money, get into the business of money, because that's where it all is. And that just got me going. Intrigued. I started studying the marketing and the business development. I started helping some clients with brand identity and things that were really ahead of its time in the industry back in the early to mid 90s. And just became really infatuated with the business.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's interesting because I've been in the business now 34 years. I can't even believe it, but I've studied distribution, the companies, and I've always seen that many people that have come into the space to help advisors to grow or get better each day have done really well, and like yourself. So, but then you started from the marketing side, you actually started really coaching advisors, correct? And coaching on growing their business and different ways to grow it.
Well, I still had one foot on the dock and one foot on the boat. I was sort of doing a variety of things. And, my phone started ringing and I started to recognize that this is a sector with some really good people. And I started to identify the difference between having a book of business and having an actual business. And I started to realize that I could play a role there. And a lot of my initial clients did not fixate on how much I cost. They focused on what I was worth. And it just became obvious that I could make a career of this.
Well, it's interesting. So can I dig in on that a little bit? Having a book of business versus having a business. Were you starting to see advisors at that point? Because I see this all the time. You can be a great advisor, but if you're not a great business owner / CEO of your own practice, it's very hard to grow and break through that ceiling of complexity. Was that where you were going with that? Is that what you started to see?
Yeah. And again, not pretending that I had any profound insight, but I started to see that advisors were getting away from the transactional nature of asking a client to buy something and focusing more directionally on where the relationship was going. And then, of course, advisors started wearing more hats, like you're saying about, running a business and dealing with HR, all of these different issues, but just really starting to focus on things like client experience and what it meant to actually have a business. Then of course, elements around enterprise value and plateau avoidance, right? How to scale up, like all of these different things. And, I was very lucky, Paul, because I happened to be put into possession of the book, The E-Myth by Michael Gerber back in the mid 90s.
Love it. It's interesting that you say that. I was thinking about that a few weeks ago. Whenever we hired new advisors, we used to give them that book to read and it worked so well. And we stopped doing it. So I was thinking about that a couple of times. Go ahead, dig in onto your thing. I just made a mental note, 2025, we're going to get back to that, but go ahead.
Oh, I love it. Well, you kind of look like a young Michael Gerber, actually, now that I think of it. But, Michael Gerber, very interesting. Like when he talked about the distinction between working in a business, transacting, and working on a business, building, I started to think of the analogy. You're either putting sand in a shopping cart or you're putting sand in an hourglass. One's trading time for money. The other is actually accretively building something. That was profound. And his analogy in the book, as you might remember, is that he talked about the difference between being a good baker and running a successful bakery, different skill sets. And I started talking about that in the context of being a financial professional, especially in such an abstract space, because financial advisors are knowledge for profit professionals. So they think for a living. So they're not transacting with a thing. They're promoting the promise of the future. So there's immense vision, delayed gratification, and, the whole compounding nature of the business. So I just created this concept of being on the business in this space and then just developed and refined what that protocol and process looked like. And it took off.
Well, it's interesting. I've seen the flip side of that too. And there's some industries out there that I've worked with that as a consumer, that they're so great at their craft, but everybody complains about that industry. I'm not going to say the industry, but it's one that builds. Then a lot of people have struggled with them because they don't run the business, but they're great at their craft, and it's something you need. So a financial advisor will hit that wall and that ceiling of complexity if they just work in it versus on it,
Wow. And it's interesting. You literally just took that out of my head, because I was thinking also about the book, The Founder's Mentality, and the whole dynamic of complexity, because a founder of an enterprise is entrepreneurial. They're innovative, they're self-motivated, and they launch and they get it rolling. And then they start to crest because of complexity. They shift their role away from entrepreneurship and innovation and start firefighting and dealing with the mundane and the minutia. And now they start serving the business. And that's when they plateau. And complexity is, as the book would say, the silent killer of growth. And so paradoxically, they plateau and they crest and they stop growing and they max out, and then frustrations and anticlimax build in. So yeah, it's an interesting study.
Really is. And, you're reminding me of advisors. When I coach advisors, I do hear them sometimes say, well, I really want to be the CEO, but I'm like, but you're such a great producer and you're so great at working with the clients. It's very hard to replace that skill. It might be less hard to have someone come into your practice and do that. So they have to, and you get that thinking of what is their real skill set. So I like how you've approached that. So while you're doing this, where did you come up with the concept of the blue square method? And I know everyone can't see Duncan visibly, but he has it right in front of him. I think I know it's something has changed the way people are thinking in the industry. How did you come up with that? And tell us all about it.
So the Advisor Playbook, Chris Jepson and I released in 2015. And it was our window into how to achieve consistent client acquisition and deploying a client experience, and also restoring liberation and order as that's all happening. Because again, the business is either serving your life or the other way around. We want advisors running the business. We don't want the business running the advisor. And that's engineered. That's self-fulfilling. So people ask us, what's the difference between the Advisor Playbook and the Blue Square Method? It was about 7 years. Okay, so we had 7 years of working with side by side, like sidecar, with some of the best financial professionals in the industry. And we started to see how they were maturing and evolving, and how the shift was not just the fixation on the quantitative measurable results, but also the qualitative, meaningful results in terms of personal, professional fulfillment, balance, purpose, gratitude, all of these other sort of, essential but kind of vague qualities. So the Blue Square Method is just the evolution. It's 7 years in the lab, working with some really good people. And it's that fine sweet spot between quantitative results and qualitative personal and professional fulfillment. So that's where the book came from.
Got it. So it's like the Advisor Playbook 2.0 here.
in many ways. And as you can imagine, I mean, there's only so many things to say. So there's a lot of reinforcement between the two books. But I'm very proud of, because, we're not the same people 7 years later. We evolve and we have a different perspective on things. So yeah, we try to capture that.
I love it. How has your message to advisors over those 7 years, how has it changed? Because obviously I believe you have a major advantage because the advisors that you're working with are seeing someone to the left and to the right. And, you're seeing everyone because you're working with so many different people from the industry. How is that message, or what have you seen? What are some of the findings you found in those 7 years that you're able to help advisors speed up their growth today?
Well, okay. So great question. The thing I'll say is philosophically, like the way we see the world, our mindset has not changed. And that is stewardship, not salesmanship. So your value's bought, not sold. So you meet with a prospective client. It's not a sales encounter. It's an interview to see if interests are aligned and let them buy into that. Okay. So things like attract, don't chase, that has not changed. Tactically, it has evolved because the advisor's aspirations and their reality has evolved. I mean, B2C organic growth, that doesn't change. Like competitor-proof clients, get out in front of their evolving needs, capture money in motion, and create advocates. Okay, so that hasn't changed. But advisors have shifted from, obviously demographic forces. They've got continuity and succession issues themselves. Their clients have continuity and succession and family investment legacy issues. So those are unmet needs that have to be addressed. And then from a business development perspective, Paul, there's the shift from B2C organic growth to B2B scaling up. Advisors who are acquiring businesses or attracting advisors to adopt and draft in behind the process. That's very complex. So that has evolved, and we've tried to stay ahead of the evolving needs of the advisor as their aspirations evolve. But we want to make sure that none of that comes at the expense of their own life, meaning they do have balance. They do have personal fulfillment. They are able to pursue other interests, not just be that one-dimensional, business person.
Yeah, which I think makes them way better as advisors if they can do that. I think that's really important. I have a couple of questions on that. So there's a stat, and I'll probably be close on this, but there's a stat that says over 40% of advisors in the industry are over 55, and only 9% are under the age of 30. So as you're working with these teams and these bigger advisors, are they trying to attract some of the younger people onto their teams for other FA roles, or are they just really running with what they have, or are you advising them on anything like that? Because I think that if we don't get enough younger people in, especially for the advisors that, 55 is young in this business, but if they don't start developing that succession plan, that basically we won't have businesses left in the future. So tell me what you're seeing there. Are you seeing any shift in that?
Well, and all roads lead to the client as well. And by that, I mean the client, the family themselves have continuity and succession issues. And a lot of, especially first generation self-made affluents, they kick the can down the road in terms of preparing their heirs for the realities and responsibilities of what alchemy and financial independence means. So my point there is that the client who has a need, the advisor who has addressed their own continuity and succession issues in real time, becomes indispensable to the client. They can relate to that. It's not theoretical. We've done it, so let me show you how you can do it. How advisors do that, it comes in a variety of forms. I mean, we've seen advisors who do add a protege. So a younger person, but following and adopting the same practice and process. And there's, that's about a 12-month exercise to build that in. Some advisors, frankly, Paul, they grow down. They go from 300 clients down to 50. The 50 who really are the heart and soul of the business. And that enables them to grow up market, but also just, find that sweet spot around not expending too much time. Now, there's a variety of ways to do that. And of course, technology.
When you think about that 300 to 50, are you finding that they're selling that other 250 off and monetizing the business there, or are they passing it on to someone on their team? What have you been seeing there?
Yeah, it's generally a combination or one or more of the automate allocate or disassociate. So automate, technology is incredible. And we all know about DIY. And of course, AI is going to have a profound impact on that and is as we speak. So there's the automate, there's the allocate. And that could be a partial book sale. That could be bring in a protege or combine with another entity or some variation of that. And then disassociate. I often have advisors where I say, you've earned the right. Give yourself permission to disassociate from clients that are not a good fit. You've had some clients for 10 years. The hassle factor is high. They're never going to become your ideal client. They don't really value and appreciate what you do. And yet, as a fiduciary, you can't bring yourself to disassociate respectfully. And I think you have to do that and the way I generally get them tipped over is I say, you're doing your favorite clients a disservice. You're doing your team a disservice by keeping these clients that are not a good fit. So give yourself permission to professionally right size and get yourself into a better rhythm there. So there's a variety of variations, as you know, but that's just a few of them.
I really love your language of disassociate, allocate. I love the language that you use there to get the point across to them. And I know that's hard. And I know most advisors will wait till the end to sell versus think about it and say, my lifestyle can change. I could monetize some of the hard work I put into or reinvest that back into the business and grow in a different way to get more ideal clients,
Well, Paul, it's interesting. Back in 2008, I had a lot of advisors, and this is counterintuitive. They were saying, okay, this is where I win, and this is where I can actually start firing some clients. And I'm like, okay, that's the last thing this industry needs is advisors firing clients. That's not what this is about. It's just not a good fit.
Yeah.
And for a lot of advisors, the whole dynamic that no good deed goes unpunished. A lot of advisors have clients. The client's success is coming at the advisor's expense because it's not a fulfilling, meaningful, synergistic relationship. So we say the best way to take care of your clients and your team is to take impeccable care of yourself. So only associate and align yourself with clients that bring something out in you and that, because of the environment and because of the appreciation, it doesn't even feel like work. And when they bring themselves to actually do that, it is incredibly liberating and rejuvenational in many ways, too.
I think our sidebar conversation before we got on was me saying that about myself, right? That I just love my work and self-inflicted pain, just keep doing it because you just love it so much. So yeah. I have a question. So, you talked about the 7 years before. During those 7 years, technology, I believe, probably got sped up faster than ever due to COVID. And, I say this on most of the shows that, as much bad that came out of COVID, there was a lot of good when it came to the business. And I look at Barnum and we probably, we're probably seeing 90% of our clients the same way you and I are meeting today via, Zooms or Teams or whatever choice you're using. And it did change many advisors. It changed the quality of their life. They're not on the road that much anymore. They're able to do it differently. And by the way, I've noticed that lots of clients like it better too. So I'm just curious. And there was so many other technologies that came out, but did you see a difference? I know the playbook changed a little bit in the 7 years. The guiding principles were the same, but did you see a difference post-COVID?
Well, no question. And, so many things in life are self-fulfilling. And yeah, you're right. People started to appreciate the gift of time, of not having to get into the car and come down to the office, but to actually still have a meaningful, impactful interaction, but to have that gift of an hour or so more because it could be done virtually. So there's many positives, but I think also just an awakening to the reality to not take anything for granted and to break the trance that a lot of people, and I've done this myself, where you know how 5 years can just come and go in a blink of the eye, and you're like, what happened? You need disruption. You need the dark to appreciate the light. You need the cold to appreciate the warm. That contrast is important. And I think what came out of the last 5 years, among other things, was just a deep gratitude for our good fortune. I'm saying, even today, I said to a client, you've got to appreciate what you have while you aspire to what you want, because advisors are lifelong planners. They're always looking down the road, trajectory. Where is this going? Okay. But in the meantime, let's take anything for granted. Let's invest the past and our good fortune into the future so that we have immense appreciation. And that's just a mindset. And I think that's one of the silver linings that came out of the last 5 years.
Yeah, that's really great. And so talk about that for a second. When you talk about working with a client this morning, how does your client engagement usually work with advisors? Are you meeting with them monthly, quarterly, twice a year? How's that work? And how does your assessment work in the beginning?
It's actually very similar to an advisor where they have an initial conversation to see if there's a fit and alignment. Like, do we see the world the same way? Is there going to be compatibility, chemistry? Are your needs aligned with our approach? That type of thing. We do a diagnostic. And, it's interesting, Paul, like our diagnostic, what we call a practice management index that popped the hood. Our view is like we're at peace. We'll help an advisor go through that exercise with no expectation they need to become a client of ours to bring all that to life. Okay. So we'll have a conversation around what the diagnostic revealed. The goal is to identify 6 to 8 gaps, little tweaks and refinements that can be made in the next 3 to 4 months. And then if we're all in sync, then we say, okay, let's go. Let's actually launch. And it's incremental. It builds on itself. So we typically would have a consultation about every 2 weeks to focus on one thing. So, that whole dynamic is, like somebody at the top of their game does not try to find one thing to improve by 10%. It's 10 things by 1%, tweaks, refinements, optimizations. And then we just progress from there. And our relationships, again, accretive, incremental, but they're open-ended and ongoing. Like the moment we're not relevant, we wind down. And sometimes we work with a client for a year. Sometimes we work for 5 years or more. Sometimes we become their virtual practice management and business development and relationship management department because we become indispensable to the team as they grow. So variations, but it's very collaborative. We don't think of ourselves as a vendor. We're partnering and we have an interest in their success. But the moment we're not relevant, it winds down.
I love it. I mean, it sounds like very close to the name of the show, Small Steps, Big Win.
Yeah.
And when I think of why we named it that's been my whole personal and professional life. If you take little incremental changes, when you get that base built, and then you take small steps, you'll get very big wins. And this is a business that those things are really incremental, especially for advisors. There's so many things that they can do each day just to get a little bit better, make their life better, make their clients' life better, and bring value to that practice. It's amazing. So,
well, as you know, Paul, it's not just money that compounds. Disciplines compound too. Neglect compounds. You think about the classic 25-year overnight success story. I mean, it was gradual.
Yes.
And things often go, the inflection point means that things build gradually and then suddenly, right? They start to compound, and then they just take on a life of its own. And that is very fulfilling to see actually come to life in a financial services business.
Yeah, it really is. And well, you made the right choice coming into this from where you are. And I'm sure you were very successful before to coming into this, and the impact you're making is amazing because I always say this is the greatest industry in the world for the right person and the worst industry in the world for the wrong person.
Mm.
But I love what you're doing. So I see that in our firm, I'm coaching 5 or 6 generations sometimes,
Amazing.
People, right? So many people from clients.
And who else gets to say that in business?
I know, right? So advisors that just the gamut. Are you seeing a difference with how you're handling different generations of people than, on your day-to-day when you guys are out doing coaching?
Yeah. I mean, the demographic study is incredible. As a dad now, and my kids are both actual people now, right? I mean, they're both high functioning in their 20s. I'm very proud of them. But I see in real time how the mentor protege dynamic shifts. Yeah, I'll never forget, Paul. I read Elon Musk's statement. He said, "My kids did not choose to be born. I chose to have kids. Therefore, they owe me nothing. I owe them everything."
Fair point.
It's interesting because I had a conversation with a friend about that, and his interpretation led right to money and entitlement and all of the different sort of unintended consequences that come from a parent that maybe goes a little over the top in providing for their kids. I think what Elon Musk was referring to is just what you owe to the next generation is guidance and direction without micromanaging and, not trying to get them to buy into my dream, but just buying into their own approach to self-actualization and the best version of themselves. And that is very fulfilling. So that goes obviously beyond parenting. It applies to our responsibility because every mentor had a mentor. And so the unwritten rule is you have to invest yourself. And in business, not just focus on making a profit, but leave a profit in the next generation. And that's a very profound honor and opportunity that we have.
And it's a serious one. And I have the great fortune. I have three, and my three children in the 20s. Two of them are in the business. I had my oldest was on my show a few weeks ago, very proud moment, but she's on one of the top teams in the industry and she is getting mentored every single day. But I've seen the opposite in this business, right? Where it's all about driving top line. And that's why I think we only have 9% under 30, and we have a real responsibility ahead of us to do that. And I think that's a great message that you're giving out there. If you were starting a financial planning practice today in asset management, wealth management, being a fiduciary in today's world, what were some of the things that you would make sure now that you've seen it? You think of the E-Myth, you're looking from the top down on all of people's practices. So you see a lot of common threads. Is there things that you would do and you would say, if I had a practice, here's what it would look like?
Well, we could spend hours breaking that down. But I think if you begin with the end in mind, you say, okay, every business is built to be sold or continued. Every investment of effort you make working on your business culminates in enterprise value and the quality of that end game and exit strategy. So I think with that as the beacon, I would say, number one, make sure you focus as much on practice management and relationship management as you do on asset management, number one. And number two, I would say to my team, let's be 100% process driven and let's build out our knowledge and expertise as subject matter experts and turn it all into intellectual property, which means everything's documented digitally, physically, and you could put that way, right, that playbook into somebody else's hands, like literally a temp, and say, this is how we interact with a prospective client. This is how we onboard a new client. This is how we service a client. If we could shift fully from the concept of being skilled to having intellectual property, which means everything is organized and standardized and professionalized, that would propel us towards that inevitable end game of a very successful exit, very meaningful exit, and at the same time, making sure clients are taken care of impeccably. So that's just sort of a stream of consciousness, but that's what I think what I'd focus on.
Well, you hit two things. I love the enterprise value thing that you started with, right? And I think that's probably only 20 years old in this industry.
You're right.
And that's a major paradigm shift for many advisors because they're not thinking that way. So I think that's a big one. And someone asked me one time, they said, what you use with intellectual property? They said, Paul, if I took away all of your licenses and you couldn't sell any products, can you still make a living in this business? And I said, okay, that's a great challenge. And that's what you're saying. Build a practice that even if you didn't sell the product, you still owned all the pieces of it that got this practice to where it was today. So
well, and I know firsthand that Barnum is not the Paul show. I know you've got deep bench strength. You've got standard operating procedures. You've got intellectual property. And as a founder, what that enables you to do is elevate to sort of this ambassador role, thought leader, all these other really fulfilling day-to-day things that have a contribution to the enterprise, but are very rewarding personally. So that's a great honor too.
Well, thank you. And what's interesting is if you can build those right people around you, you all can grow faster. Because if the founder, that entrepreneur can be who they are and do what they do, usually bring more enterprise value to everybody in the business, which is pretty fun. Duncan, this has been amazing. I'm definitely have to get you back on the show one day. When I think of the name of the show, I said it earlier, Small Steps, Big Wins. you're crushing it in that and you're impacting. The cool thing is, I think one of the things that's missing in our industry today, I was brought up in the beginning, early part of my career on just the protection side. And that was very, emotionally driven and the value we bring. And I think a lot of people are forgetting the impact they're making to the end client, right? While we're talking about enterprise value and all this great stuff, it's a life that you're impacting on the other side, which you talked about earlier. So when I look at yourself, and that was a major challenge for me coming into this role, not working with the end customer. And I had to really do some soul searching to say, but now I have 350 advisors that are doing that on behalf of me and Barnum, and the impact is just getting bigger and bigger. And you're doing that in spades now. So I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. This industry is just amazing and you're impacting a lot of lives out there. So thank you so much for what you do.
Well, it's very nice of you to say, and I'll just right back at you. Your enterprise, you and your team, your community is the embodiment of what I would call the advisor of the future. And what I mean by that is you're planners, you're looking down the road, you're future pacing your relationships. But I've been in your events before. I've felt the energy and the quality of caring that your team has for the client's well-being is profound. It's unrivaled. It's very, very impressive. So thank you for everything you're saying about us, but I'll just throw it right back at you. It's very impressive to see.
Thank you. And well, have a great rest of the day and have a great holiday season. Thanks again, Duncan.
Take care, Paul.
You got it, everybody. Spotify, Apple, please share this. Get this out to the advisor community. This will impact a lot of them. So thanks again.
Thank you for listening to Small Steps, Big Wins. Please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
All opinions expressed by the program participants are solely their current opinions and do not reflect the opinions their respective parent companies or affiliates or the companies with which the program participants are affiliated. Investments or strategies mentioned in this program may not be suitable for you, and you should make your own independent decision regarding them. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You should strongly consider seeking advice from your own investment advisor. Securities and investment advisory services offered through qualified registered representatives of MML Investor Services, LLC. Member SIPC, 6 Corporate Drive, Shelton, Connecticut, 06484, telephone number 203-513-6000.